Hello, I am Farid Herrera, your coach for today, and welcome to this mobility routine which will target the shoulders, spine, hips and ankles. These are the areas that stiffen up the most as a result of a sedentary lifestyle, a desk job, and even as a result of repeating activities that are limited in variety of movement. You won't need much equipment for this routine other than a pair of yoga blocks for later and a mat, which is optional. My recommended minimum volume for this routine is to go through it 4 to 5 times per week, and as you memorize it, you'll be able to take parts of it and go through them as of when your body feels it needs to mobilize those particular areas. So without further ado, let's get into it. So you will start in a seated or kneeling position on your mat, and you will start drawing big overhead circles going backwards with one arm. We're going to be going through 5 of these going backwards, and then we are going to go forwards for another 5 reps. Make sure you are rotating your spine. So switching arms, overhead circles going backwards, rotating the spine as you lift your arm overhead. Once you've done your 5, you're going to switch directions and go forwards. 2, 3, rotating the spine, 4 and 5. Next up, we're going to work our scapular retraction and protraction, which is simply the gliding of your shoulder blades backwards and forwards along your rib cage. So I'm going to sit sideways so you can have a good look at the motion of the shoulders. You're going to have both your arms straight out in front of you, and you will retract your shoulder blades and glide them, try and pinch them together behind you. From there, you are going to glide them forward and trying to reach as far forward as you can with your hands. This will separate your shoulder blades and will glide them apart. We're going to be doing 10 of these. Once we're done with the retraction and protraction, I'm going to switch directions here, and we're going to bring our arms out to the side, and we are simply going to externally rotate our shoulders and then internally rotate them sequentially. As you do this, notice how my spine is flexing and extending as I'm doing the rotation. So as you internally rotate, you flex, and as you externally rotate, you open your chest. We're going to be doing 10 of these as well. We've got about 5 more to go. 4, 3, 2, making sure to move the spine along with the shoulders as much as possible. And time. Shake it out here. Next up, we're going to continue rotating our spine and trying to open up our chest and the front of our shoulders by reaching backwards with one arm as we turn our bodies. So we're going to reach back one arm and do a small pulse. So we're rotating the spine and trying to open up our chest and the front of our shoulders as much as possible. We're going to go through 10 of these on each side. And 6, 7, 8. Make sure you do a short pulse. Try and follow your hand with your head as well. And we are aiming to rotate our trunk and open the front of our shoulders as much as possible. And that concludes our 10. Next up, you're going to switch into an all fours position with your knees down on your mat below your hips and your wrists right below your shoulders. We're going to be doing the cat-camel movement, which will require you to sink into your shoulder blades as you arch your back and then push the floor away and flex your back as you look down. We're going to do about 5 reps of these. Make sure you take your time and take all of the joints that you just moved through their ranges of motion. So retraction and protraction, pushing and also flexing and extending the spine. And once you've done your 5, we are going to move on. So in the next portion of the routine, we're going to be focusing on the hips. So you are going to sit down with your sit bones just off the mat and your heels in the middle of the mat. And your feet are going to be wider than hip width apart. Hands can support back behind you. And from this position, we're going to go into some hip swivels. So we're going to be turning one knee out as the other turns in. And we're going to swivel our hips. We're going to be doing about 10 of these. And you're working to make contact with your knees on the floor. If you struggle touching the floor with your knees, it's perfectly fine not to force it. Don't push too hard and just let them hover just above the floor and have the knee touch as a goal. Once we've done 5 reps, we are going to pause on one side and we're going to lean forward with our body, swap our hand position, and just lean into that front leg as much as possible. Do it very gently and try not to round your back. You can also reach on a diagonal in front of your foot and then right in front of your shin. Try to play with the angle here before you swap sides. This will demand a greater stretch from the hips and from the glutes, so have a little play with it and make sure that you are not rounding your back in order to reach as far forward as you can. The goal is not to reach, it is simply to mobilize and get a good stretch going in the hips and glutes. So once you've done one on each side, you're going to repeat again and try and get a little bit more range if it's available to you. Remember that the body reacts to the activity that we do, so the more you demand these movements from your body, the more your central nervous system will free up these ranges for you. So as you repeat this, you might be able to lean into the movement a little bit deeper. Next up, using the exact same pattern, we're going to see if we can load that front leg a little bit. So as you lean now, try and lift your hips up off the floor if you can, making sure you use that back arm as a base of support. So push yourself up, try and gently lift your hips off the floor and then swap sides. Using the hands if necessary, lifting the hips. We've done about 3 reps here and swap sides again. Hands if necessary, 4, and then see if you can remove your hands at the top once you've lifted your hips up off the floor. Next up, we're going to be adding a little bit more movement and we are going to be sliding the back leg around to the front and leaning a little bit of weight onto it in a kneeling lunge position. So lift the hips, find balance, swipe that leg all the way in front, lean into it, and put the hand down on the floor if necessary, swipe the leg back and sit the hips down and repeat on the other side. This will require a little bit of balance and definitely more movement into the hip swivels, and we'll start working your lunge and your ankle mobility as well as we are leaning the knees over the toes during the lunge. And lean into the ankle, try and get the knees over the toes to get some motion in the ankle. Once you've done about 2 reps of this final variation on each side, you are going to sit yourself down, straighten your legs and simply shake your legs out and have a very short break. Okay, in the next section, we're going to open up the hips and work on our ankle dorsiflexion as well. So I'll pop over onto my mat on the side so you can have a look at how this section is going to go. So you're going to start in a crouching position, essentially sitting on your heels with the heels off the floor and you are on the ball of your foot. From this position, you're going to reach back behind you and stay on your fingertips, and then you are going to tuck your pelvis under into a posterior tilt. So notice the difference here between the anterior tilt and the posterior tilt. And once you have tucked it under, you're going to lean your knees forward as much as possible. You can try to reach them towards the floor or simply hover them a couple of inches off the floor. Both are viable. The important part here is to make sure that you are keeping your pelvis in a posterior tilt, and you should feel a stretch and a sensation in your thighs and the front of your hips. You're going to stay in that position for about 15 seconds and then come out and simply shake your legs out one at a time by lifting your heel, turning your hips and then you will swap legs and repeat on the other side, just to shake and straighten your legs out before going back into. So once again, we're setting this up properly, sitting on our heels on the ball of our feet, tucking our pelvis posteriorly, reaching back with the hands behind you, and then leaning the knees forward as much as possible. Once again, if you can't get them to the floor, it is not a problem. Just hover them up off the floor a couple of inches. If you can, lean your knees on the floor and remove your hands momentarily. That should increase the strength demand and the stretch in the anterior part of the body. Finally, from there, bring your hands in parallel in front of you on the mat and shake your legs out, straighten them, and just give them a nice shake before we move on. Moving on, we're going to be mobilizing the hips in internal and external rotation, as well as the ankles. So starting position for this one is going to be in your crouched position with your heels off the floor, and you are going to pivot out to one side and see if you can place one knee down on the floor. And from here, we're going to start adding a twist of the body once we have pivoted, just to get a little bit of thoracic rotation as well. So pivot, touch the knee down, and twist the upper body. We're going to be repeating this 5 times on each side, and you can use the arms here to create a little bit more momentum on your rotation, and also to get a little bit of flow going in this movement. Once you've done your 5 on each side, you can stand up and just shake your legs out before getting back into the next variation. The next variation, we're going to pivot, but this time we're going to lean a little bit of weight over that front foot to try and work on the toes and the ankle. And you may of course use your hands to do this, but if you can, try and remove them after you have leant forward as much as possible. The goal here is to try and get that front knee on the floor, and then remove the hands off the floor and stretch out the front of that hip. Make sure you are taking your time with this. If it feels heavy on the knees or toes, no need to touch the knee down onto the floor. Simply just lean it over and keep it a few inches off the floor until you feel you can touch down. Once you feel you can start touching down quite comfortably, you are going to try and do this without using your hands. So simply leaning forward onto that front foot, opening up that hip, touching down the knee onto the mat, and then reversing that motion. Once again, using your body and hips as leverage without using your hands. Once again, a total of 3 to 5 on each side for this one, because it's slightly more intense, would be perfectly adequate. Moving on now, we're going to place our hands on the mat and take a wide stance. We're going to shift our weight side to side, making sure to keep the hands on the floor for support. If you can, try and straighten one of the legs here. As you shift side to side, we're going to do about 5 shifts on each side. Once you've done your 5 shifts, see if you can remove the hands off the floor. And spend a bit of time here with your hips as low as possible, trying to get them level with your knees. And we're going to repeat these side shifts. We're going to do 5 on each side. This time we're not going to use the hands, trying our best to keep the hips as low as possible. Once you've done 5 on each side, you're going to stand up and straighten your legs, have a very short break before we get back into it and move on to the final portion of this section. So to finish this one off, we are going to do some upper body rotations, contralateral. So you're going to reach over with one arm towards the opposite foot, and you are going to open up and twist your upper body again to rotate that thoracic spine, and also opening up the front of the shoulders, the chest, and your pecs as you do these. We're going to do about 5 on each side, and make sure you do a short little bounce at the top of your rotation, just to make sure that you are opening up as much as possible. Once again, try and keep the hips nice and low during the side to side transition. And once you've done your 5, you are going to rise up and shake it out. In this next section, we're going to grab our yoga blocks and we're going to place them on top of our mat, and we're going to start in a knees down position. Now to start this one off, you're going to sit your hips back towards your heels and drop your chest down towards the floor. With your hands on the block, this should leave you in a arms overhead position. From here, you're going to try your best to sink your chest down into the floor and create a big opening of the shoulders and a nice stretch in the front of the body. Try to spend about 5 to 10 seconds in that position, and then lift your chest back up, reset the cubes, and repeat this one. So sinking the hips back towards the heels a little bit, and then as you start, dropping the chest towards the mat. And then once you are set up in that position, you're going to start slowly sliding the cubes forward, getting your hips up above the knees, and try to look up. Think of getting the top of your ribs, your collarbone, down into the floor, and that should create a nice opening of the shoulders and a nice deep stretch in the anterior line of the body. Once again, 5 to 10 second holds is adequate. You can even go up to 15 if this stretch feels great for you. And we're going to be doing this for 3 reps. So we've got a final one now. Arms overhead, hips behind the knees, and slowly glide yourself forward using your cubes to slide into the stretch. Once you're done, you're going to come out of the stretch and just take a moment to shake it out and feel your overhead range. Next up, we have a little bit more movement. So to set this one up, you are going to start with the same side foot and arm on the mat. So half of your body will be on the mat and the other half will be off the mat. From that position, you're going to be taking a step across behind your foot onto your mat, squaring your feet, lifting your pelvis, pushing out from the shoulder, and just spending a bit of time here in this half bridge position. Once you've gotten the hang of this, keeping your hips nice and high, you're going to reach overhead with the free arm. From here, you're going to draw 2 circles overhead with that arm, and then you are going to reset back off your mat. And swap position. So start with the opposite hand and foot on the mat, take a step onto your mat, square your feet, lift your pelvis, push your shoulders up, and you are in your half bridge position. Start to draw your hand overhead, keeping the gaze onto the hand and following it along. And then once you get the hang of that, you're going to draw 2 big circles overhead before you reset back to center. We're just going to do 1 set of 2 to 3 circles on each side for this one, but you can of course add a few sets and do more. This concludes our follow along mobility routine targeted at the shoulders, thoracic spine, hips and ankles. The volume recommendation for this is to try and repeat it a minimum of 4 to 5 times per week. And as you start to memorize the routine, you'll be able to take small parts of it and maybe do those daily if you feel that some areas need more work than others. I've been Farid Herrera, your coach for today. Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you in the next one. For any more movement and mobility resources, please feel free to check out my YouTube channel, Farid Herrera. There are plenty more videos on my channel for you to have a look through for all of your movement and mobility needs.